Thank you, Governor Quinn. Thank all of you. It's wonderful, especially to have Hillary back home. And I was thinking that when Hillary and President Clinton were in the White House, the chief of staff at one point was a man named Erskine Bowles. You remember him? He's the Bowles of Simpson Bowles. And Erskine Bowles was in Chicago not long ago, and he told a story I want to share with you. It's a story about an uncle of his in a small town in North Carolina. He had a very long and colorful life, and he died. And the local newspaper, of course, wanted to do an obituary, and they sent out a young reporter who interviewed the widow, got a lot of facts, turned in a draft to the editor, and the editor said, "It's fine. Call the widow to be sure she says it's accurate, and then be sure to tell her our editorial policy." He called the widow, read her the obituary, and he said, "What do you think?" She said, "It's lovely." And he said, "Well, now let me tell you our editorial policy. It's 800 words, and we charge $5 a word." She said, 800 words, $5 a word. She said, "Forget it." And he said, "Well, we have to give the news about your husband's death. What would you like?" And she said, "Just make it very simple. Sam died." 15 minutes later, the young reporter called back. He said, "I turned in the second draft to the editor, and the editor said that I should tell you we have a 5-word minimum. You're entitled to 3 more words." And she said, "Well, let me think a minute." She said, "Well, let's say Sam died, Cadillac for sale." Now, why do I tell that story? Because we're supposed to be limited to just a few words. But I do want to tell a little bit about exposures I've had through my life to Abraham Lincoln. I begin and end with the words of my boss and later law partner at Sidley Austin, Illinois Governor Adlai Stevenson. He said, "Here, my friends, on the prairies of Illinois and of the Middle West, we can see a long way in all directions. We look to east, to west, to north, and south. Our commerce, our ideas come and go in all directions. Here there are no barriers, no defenses to ideas and to aspirations. We want none. We want no shackles on the mind or the spirit, no rigid patterns of thought, no iron conformity." I heard Adlai say those words at the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1952. The delegates a few days later drafted him for president, and although he ran an inspiring campaign, he lost to President Eisenhower. And in Springfield, when the press interviewed him and asked him how he felt, he quoted Abraham Lincoln, who had lost an election. And Abraham Lincoln said, "There's a story about a boy who stubbed his toe in the dark. It said that he was too old to cry, but it hurt too much to laugh." Adlai's great-grandfather, Jesse Fell, was an intimate friend and early supporter of Abraham Lincoln. And Adlai revered Lincoln with a passion. When he was governor and had a hard decision to make, he would walk alone the few blocks to Lincoln's home. He'd sit there to reflect. In 1956, he was nominated again. He opened the vice presidential nomination to the convention, and Jack Kennedy ran and came in a very close second. The Kennedy family then asked Adlai to appoint Robert Kennedy to the Stevenson campaign staff so that he would get some exposure to a national campaign. And because Bob and I were the same age. We were often put together. We were often roommates. And sometimes, I want to tell you what happened when we got to Springfield, Illinois. We arrived, we're getting off the plane, and Bob said to me, "I've never been in Springfield. We've heard Adley's speech 563 times. How far is Lincoln's home?" And I said, "It's just a couple blocks." I said, "If we go over there quickly, we can walk back and forth and get back in time to get on the airplane." And in that talk, when we were talking on the way back, we had a conversation that ended up changing my life, because Bob said to me, when I was a child, there were three great influences on children: the home, school, the church. He said, now I see a fourth great influence on children in my home, and it's television. That led to many conversations through the years, and it led 4 years later, when Jack Kennedy was elected president, to appoint me chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. At the FCC, I'm proud to have launched what has become public television and public radio, what is now NPR and PBS, led to things like Sesame Street for children. We also launched the first communication satellite, which has enabled people all over the world to see television live. In Washington, my wife Jo and I learned more about Abraham Lincoln when one night President Kennedy invited us to the White House. There was a small group of 8 or 10 couples who invited once a month an outside speaker who had to speak about something that had nothing to do with current events. And at the White House, President Kennedy had invited an authority on Abraham Lincoln, Professor David Donald, who won the Pulitzer in his biography of Lincoln. And Professor Donald said, in terms of Abraham Lincoln's place in history, if he was going to be killed, he was killed at exactly the right moment. He had won the war, he'd been reelected, freed the slaves, passed the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment. He said if he'd been killed several years earlier, people would have said, this guy is not a good president. He doesn't know how to pick generals. He doesn't know what to do with the slaves. He would have gone out of history not well revered. If he'd been killed several years later, he said people would have said he didn't know what to do with the Reconstruction period. So he said, if you're going to be assassinated, that was exactly the right moment for Abraham Lincoln. President Kennedy heard this. He was sitting on a couch. He got up, and he said, you made me think, because before I was the president, I used to fill out a form every year. Who was a great president? Who was a medium president? Who was a poor president? He said, now that I'm the president, I realize how silly that is, because you have no idea, unless you're the president, to really know what the facts are, what the pressures were, what the options were. In Washington, we came home, and my wife served for years on the board of the Abraham Lincoln Museum and Library in Springfield. And we did something which everyone should do. 5 years ago, on our 60th anniversary, we took our children and grandchildren there for a leisurely visit to really absorb what we could learn and kids could learn about Lincoln. This honor today moves me very deeply. I'm very grateful to the Chancellor of the Academy, Tom Johnson, who sent me the words of Governor Adlai Stevenson 50 years ago in the first class when the Academy gave its first awards. And Adlai said, I'm grateful for this recognition. It goes without saying that it combines two names as precious and meaningful to me as Lincoln and Illinois, enlarges my gratitude. Lincoln and Illinois are inseparably linked for all time. I wish my name could be linked with both of those, but the link, even for an evening, makes me very happy and very proud. So thank you very, very much.